Story 1. Canadian soldier Leo Major and his friend Willie Arsenault were scouting the Dutch town of Zwolle, which had been captured by German forces during World War II. On the scouting trip, the two decided to liberate Zwolle together, but they were spotted and Arsenault was killed. Major, enraged, killed 2 German soldiers while the rest fled. On the outskirts of the town, Major intercepted a vehicle and disarmed the soldiers inside. He told a French-speaking soldier that all the Canadian artillery would fire on the town in the morning and deliberately released the soldier to spread the rumor, even returning his weapon. That night, Major decided to liberate the town single-handedly. Arming himself with many weapons, he set off explosions and made noise to create the impression that the entire Canadian army was present. Several times that night, Major went back and forth from Zwolle to the Canadian base, taking 8 to 10 German prisoners each time. At one point, Major located the Geheime Staatspolizei headquarters and raided it alone. He killed several Schutzstaffel officers and the rest fled. By morning, Major discovered that the German occupiers had retreated completely. Major was a sniper who had lost an eye in a phosphorus grenade explosion years earlier. He remained in the military because he insisted one eye was enough to aim his weapon and that he looked like a pirate. The Dutch town of Zwolle was liberated by a one-eyed sniper. Major carried out several other legendary actions, but this was his best. Story 2. Let us not forget that Isaac Newton ran out of mathematics to work with and said he would just invent calculus. Story 3. Otis invented what we consider the modern elevator. When people doubted its safety, he hoisted himself to a great height and had someone cut the cable with an axe to demonstrate that the elevator would remain safe even in a worst-case scenario. Story 4. In 1888, Almond Brownstroger, an undertaker, noticed he was losing a lot of business to another undertaker in town. He discovered the other undertaker's wife, a telephone operator, intercepted calls intended for Stroger's funeral home and routed them to her husband's business. 3 years later, Stroger patented the automatic telephone exchange, a system that allowed telephone users to make calls without the need for human operators, single-handedly destroying an entire workforce. Story 5. Cliff Stoll, author of The Cuckoo's Egg, noticed unusual traffic on his university servers. At first, no one believed him, but he eventually uncovered a major hacking attempt to steal missile designs and helped spur developments in internet security. Some details remain unclear. Story 6. Jon Snow was not the fictional character. He was the father of epidemiology. No one believed him that the cholera outbreak in what is now Soho was caused by a contaminated water pump. He removed the pump handle. They arrested him for vandalism and held him until the outbreak suddenly ended. Story 7. Donald Knuth is one of the big names in computer science. Back in the 1960s, he set out to write the definitive texts on computer programming and the analysis of algorithms. The first 3 volumes were published, and he began the 4th in the early to mid-1970s. He was unhappy with how newer printings and editions were typeset, so he took a summer to solve that problem. A decade later, the 4th volume still had not been completed, but as a consolation prize we got TeX, later extended to the more commonly used LaTeX. It is without question the most comprehensive and powerful language for creating documents with heavy technical requirements. It is a mix of a markup language like hypertext markup language and a compiled language like the C programming language. It is completely free and has been for well over 30 years, and is probably the most reliable piece of software I have ever seen. Certainly for its size and scope, there is little else of comparable quality. There is no mathematics that cannot be properly typeset in TeX or LaTeX. Its default style is instantly recognizable to any working mathematician. It is used across nearly all science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields in hundreds, if not thousands, of journals accept manuscripts written only in LaTeX. It was not until the early 2000s that drafts of the 4th volume started to appear. Nobody seemed to mind. Story 8. This was likely the moment Nando Pardue and Roberto Canessa decided they could not wait any longer and walked for 10 days across the Andes with no warm clothes, climbing gear, or food except scraps from their dead friends carried in a sock. They finally found someone, Sergio Catalan, who rode on horseback all night and then took a bus to get help. The climbers had come from the wreckage of a crashed plane that everyone had been searching for over 2 months. They needed help for other survivors who were injured and starving. Ultimately, 14 survivors were rescued. Story 9. It was Aimo Koivunen. He was a Finnish soldier in the Second World War when the Finns were trying to reclaim land from the Soviets. He became separated from his unit in the middle of nowhere during the war. He was responsible for carrying stimulant tablets issued to troops in case of injury or exhaustion. One of those tablets was Pervitin, a methamphetamine in tablet form. Instead of taking 1 or 2 tablets, he swallowed an entire bottle and went on a weeks-long methamphetamine-fueled rampage. He was hit by a landmine, evaded Soviet soldiers, caught a bird and ate it raw, all while on skis. He finally reached Finnish lines. On arrival, he weighed only about 90 pounds and had a heart rate of 200 beats per minute. He lived for another 45 years. Story 10. Brian Acton interviewed at Facebook and was turned down. He said screw it and built WhatsApp. Several years later, Facebook bought WhatsApp for $19 billion. This is his tweet from 2009, the day he interviewed. I am getting it framed for my desk at work. Story 11. Maurice Hillman invented more than 40 vaccines during his career in the pharmaceutical industry. In 1963, his oldest daughter caught the mumps. He cultured a sample from her, developed a vaccine, and injected it into his younger daughter. That vaccine is still in use and has saved millions of lives. In total, it is estimated that his work has saved 118 million lives worldwide. Story 12. The man who started Federal Express wrote a college paper about a nationwide overnight shipping company and received a C grade, yet he started the company anyway. Later, when the company was struggling and he could not get a loan, it was almost bankrupt. He bet the next week's payroll at a casino on roulette and won. He also received a Silver Star in the Vietnam War and later became co-owner of the Washington Redskins, which is often viewed as the biggest failure of his life. Story 13. Leo Major liberated an entire village from Nazi forces alone and is one of the handful of extraordinary soldiers often remembered from World War II. Story 14. The giant Norse axeman who held the choke point at the Battle of Stamford Bridge blocked the narrow crossing. By the time the bulk of the English army arrived, the Vikings on the west side were either slain or fleeing across the bridge. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports that the axeman, possibly armed with a Dane axe, single-handedly delayed the entire army. According to the account, he cut down as many as 40 Englishmen and was defeated only when an English soldier floated under the bridge in a half-barrel and thrust his spear through the planks, mortally wounding him. Story 15. I am surprised no one has mentioned Catherine the Great of Russia. She decided her husband was ineffective and organized a military coup to overthrow him. Although the plan was discovered early, she dressed in military uniform and marched with her newly loyal army to the palace of Peter, where he was forced to relinquish the throne without bloodshed. Peter later turned up dead under suspicious circumstances, but for a military coup it was relatively nonviolent. If declaring that she would rule Russia herself is not impressive, I do not know what is. Her decisiveness is part of why her name endures. Story 16. This is a relatively recent story. Manji, the mountain man, lived in a very remote Indian village where the route to the nearest town was blocked by a mountain, so villagers had to climb over it daily to get essential supplies. During one of these trips, his wife fell from the mountain and died. He loved her a lot. He first tried to persuade the government to build a tunnel there, but to no avail. He then set out alone to carve a path through the mountain with just an axe. He worked for more than 10 years and finally succeeded. There is a Bollywood movie about him titled Manji, the Mountain Man. Story 17. Desmond Doss single-handedly saved between 50 and 100 men on Hacksaw Ridge in Okinawa. When his company was ordered to retreat under Japanese attack, he refused, remained on the ridge unarmed, and dragged as many soldiers as he could to safety without assistance. Even after being shot by a sniper and riddled with shrapnel, he made sure another soldier was lowered down the hillside before he descended. I am aware there is a movie. I have read about him and know he did more than what the film shows, but I did not want to write a long post listing every example of his courage. Story 18. Albert Einstein admired James Clerk Maxwell and regarded him as the father of modern physics. Maxwell not only formulated the classical theory of electromagnetic radiation, he also used pure mathematics to calculate exactly what Saturn's rings were made of. It was not until the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 flybys in the early 1980s, which returned photographs, that we obtained confirmation that Maxwell was correct. He also calculated how to produce a color photograph in 1855. The first successful one was produced in 1861. Story 19. Juan Pujol Garcia was a Spaniard who created his own counterintelligence operation for the Allies during World War II. Initially, he approached British and American intelligence services to offer his services, but both rebuffed him. Undeterred, he adopted a fictional persona as a pro-fascist Spanish official and was recruited by the Nazis, who instructed him to travel to Britain to recruit agents. Instead, he created a network of fictitious agents and sub-agents using publicly available information such as newspapers and travel brochures. At that point, he again contacted Allied intelligence and was finally recruited. Garcia continued his work throughout the war, and for the same operation he received both a knighthood from the British and the Iron Cross from Nazi Germany. The Nazis never realized he was a double agent. Story 20. In 1947, a man named Thor Heyerdahl tried to prove his theory that the Polynesian islands were settled by people from South America rather than Asia. Few believed him because it seemed impossible to cross such a large ocean with the technology available at the time. He decided to build a boat using only the tools and materials that would have been available during those migrations and sailed it across the Pacific Ocean, nearly dying in the process but ultimately reaching the Polynesian islands. Story 21. The doctor stationed in Antarctica removed his own appendix. Goddamn. Story 22. When Nintendo turned down a collaboration with Sony, Sony said, "Forget it, we will do it ourselves." The rest is history. Story 23. The first thing that comes to mind is the Louisiana Purchase. Congress planned to buy a small portion of the available land, but Jefferson employed a broad interpretation of the Constitution to double the size of the United States without congressional approval. Story 24. When Julius Caesar marched into Rome, he declared himself the military leader. Story 25. Henry VIII could not get his way with the Pope, so he established the Church of England to do what he wanted. Story 26. A man who owned a tractor repair company made a substantial amount of money and bought a Ferrari. He felt the car was not as good as it could be and was not very comfortable, so he took his complaints directly to Enzo Ferrari. Enzo Ferrari insulted him, saying a mere tractor mechanic did not know how to make a sports car. That confrontation sparked a rivalry that continues to this day. The man was Ferruccio Lamborghini. Story 27. During the American Revolution, John Paul Jones sailed to England to attack British naval ships. He succeeded, of course, and returned safely. After the war, he was even pardoned by the town where he had burned most of the ships. Story 28. A soldier in the war had wounded fingers. A doctor would not amputate them, so he bit them off himself. Story 29. Leonid Rogozov removing his own appendix, or Inés Ramirez Perez performing her own cesarean section. Rogozov was a doctor. Perez was a poor Mexican woman. Story 30. Metallica fired Dave Mustaine in 1983 because he was something of a control freak and wanted to take the band in a more progressive and jazz metal direction. He was also abusing drugs and was known for violent behavior at the time. He went on to create his own band, Megadeth, and over the next 30 years he has sold millions of albums and toured the world, writing and controlling much of his work. They have since reconciled. He is an outstanding guitarist and songwriter. When guitarist Hillel Slovak died in 1988, John Frusciante was a 19-year-old and a huge fan of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was heartbroken and did not want to see the end of his favorite band, so he auditioned to play lead guitar. He got the gig and helped take them to the top of the charts. Today, he is considered one of the greatest rock guitarists. Story 31. Martine Rothblatt, founder of Sirius XM Radio and an extraordinary polymath, was told her daughter Genesis had 3 months to live after being diagnosed with a form of pulmonary arterial hypertension, a fatal disease. The disease causes high pressure in the blood vessels that carry blood from the heart to the lungs, causing them to narrow and reducing oxygen delivery. Rothblatt quit all her other work, went to the library to save her daughter, and despite having no background in the field, developed a treatment and in the process founded United Therapeutics, a billion-dollar biotechnology company. Rothblatt's life story is remarkable. Story 32. Marie Curie, a Polish-French chemist and physicist, died from prolonged radiation exposure while seeking medical advances. She sacrificed herself as a human test subject, fully aware of the risks. Here in Scotland, we have many Marie Curie charity shops that provide funds for hospices and the like. I am pretty sure her pioneering work helped save my life and the lives of countless others. She was quoted in July 1912 as saying, "Fuck it. I'll do it myself," allegedly. Story 33. Clara Lemlich took the stage at a union meeting in 1909 to declare a general strike after the older male union leaders told the working girls there was no point in striking and it would be too hard. They said to be patient and deal with it. The 20-year-old Clara interrupted them, climbed onto the stage, and shouted that she was tired of talk and it was time to strike. The workers agreed instantly. I found my old research and a translation of what she said, originally in Yiddish. I have listened to all the speeches and I have no further patience for talk. I too have worked and suffered and I am tired of talk. I move that we go on general strike. Now. Story 34. The closest I can think of is Erwin Rommel during the Blitzkrieg. Seeing an opportunity to exploit a weakness, he decided to charge 200 miles into French territory. Story 35. The Soviet woman who lost her husband to the Nazis sold everything to pay for a tank on the condition that she would be allowed to drive it into battle against the Nazis. Read about Maria Oktyabrskaya on Wikipedia. Story 36. Hannibal of Carthage decided to take his army over the Alps, including war elephants. Story 37. Alexander the Great solved the Gordian knot by cutting it with his sword. Story 38. Herbert Hoover, biographical book review at Slate Star Codex. His whole life is a cyclical story. Here is a problem. Nobody can solve it. Give me total control. He takes control, offends many involved, and fixes everything. You probably remember Herbert Hoover as the man who bungled the Great Depression. Maybe you should not. Maybe you should remember him as a bold explorer looking for silver in the jungles of Burma, as the heroic defender of Tientsin during the Boxer Rebellion, as a dashing pirate philanthropist traveling the world and saving millions of lives, as the temporary dictator of Europe, as a geologist, as a bank tycoon, or as the author of the premier early 1900s textbook on metallurgy. How did a backward orphan, the son of a blacksmith, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Midwest, grow up to be a captain of industry and a United States president? How did he become such a towering figure in the history of philanthropy? That biographer, Kenneth White, writes, the number of lives Hoover saved through his various humanitarian campaigns might exceed 100 million, a record of benevolence unlike anything in human history. To find out, I picked up White's Hoover, An Extraordinary Life in Extraordinary Times. One notable summary snippet of his life. Herbert Hoover was the first student at Stanford. Not just a member of the first graduating class, but literally the first student. He arrived at the dorms 2 months early to get a head start on various money-making schemes, including distributing newspapers, delivering laundry, tending livestock, and helping other students register. He later sold some of these businesses to other students and started more, operating a steady churn of enterprises throughout his college career. His academics remained mediocre and he continued to have few friends until he tried out for the football team in his sophomore year. He had no athletic talent and failed miserably, but the coach, whose eye for talent apparently transcended athletics, spotted potential in Hoover and asked him to become team manager. In this role, Hoover was an unqualified success. He turned the team's debt into a surplus and started the big game, a University of California, Berkeley versus Stanford football match played on Thanksgiving that remains a beloved Stanford tradition. Other Stanford students noticed his competence, and by his senior year he was running not just the football team but the baseball team, a lecture series, a set of concerts and plays, and much of the student government. Story 39. Sir Ranulph Fiennes, after an expedition to the Arctic, had frostbitten fingers on one hand. Irritated and uncomfortable while waiting for the doctors to arrange treatment, he went to his garden shed and amputated them himself. Story 40. George Clooney bought his own spy satellite to document the alleged crimes of an African warlord because no one else would. Story 41. Here is a notable mention, albeit somewhat obscure. Sam Regenstrief once produced 40% of the dishwashers in the United States of America. He fell ill with a kidney stone and went to his local hospital in Indiana. Upon leaving, he was disgusted by the waiting times and the quality of care. He took matters into his own hands, created a hospital, and founded the Regenstrief Institute. The institute helped map the genome of coronavirus disease 2019 and translated its findings into more than 20 languages, helping the world fight the virus. I am thrilled to receive gold and silver for the first time. Story 42. Henry Ford proposed buying Ferrari so Ford could be competitive in the performance car market. The deal was about to be signed, but Enzo Ferrari wanted to sell only the road car division, not the racing team. When negotiations failed, Ford developed the GT40. Story 43. Pedro Serrano realized Jobu was not going to help him hit a damn curveball. Story 44. Wasn't there a Russian doctor who performed stomach surgery on himself using only a bottle of vodka as an anesthetic? Story 45. Lioness of Brittany, Jean de Clisson. Story 46. General Vladimir Karpovich Pikolov was in charge of the chemical troops of the Soviet Union during the Chernobyl nuclear accident. When asked to have one of his men take a radiation reading inside the reactor, he said he would do it himself. Not only did he survive radiation exposure, he lived until 2003 and died of natural causes. He also survived 3 of the deadliest battles on the Eastern Front during World War II. Story 47. During the American Civil War, General McClellan commanded the Army of the Potomac. He was an overly cautious officer who did not do enough to move against Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. President Abraham Lincoln grew frustrated with the inaction and wrote to McClellan asking, "Can I borrow the army since you are not using it for anything?" Story 48. Stanislav Petrov chose not to press the button to launch nuclear missiles when the Soviet early warning system falsely reported an incoming American missile strike in 1983. One man saved the entire world from nuclear destruction. This is undeniably one of the greatest moments in human history. There should be a statue of him in every major city. Story 49. Maria Vasilievna Oktyabrskaya, known as the Fighting Girlfriend, sold all her possessions to buy and donate a tank to the Soviet Union after her husband's death in 1941. She asked the army for permission to drive the T-34 tank, which she promptly named the Fighting Girlfriend. Oktyabrskaya proved her ability and bravery in battle and was promoted to sergeant. She later died in 1944 from wounds suffered in battle. She was later given the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor a Soviet soldier could receive. Maria was one of 2 female tank drivers to receive the title. Story 50. Admiral Yi Sun-sin of Korea. When the Japanese launched their first invasion of Korea in 1592, the Korean kingdom was not prepared. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's fleet initially gained easy passage because the admiral in charge panicked and ordered the fleet scuttled after transports were attacked. Admiral Yi Sun-sin then emerged. He improved and deployed the turtle ship, the Geobuxian, a covered warship with a spiked roof, cannon ports, and the ability to use incendiary weapons. With 1 turtle ship and a flotilla of refitted fishing boats, he repeatedly defeated the Japanese Navy despite being vastly outnumbered. He achieved these victories without losing a single ship in battle. Court politics worked against him. Some officials who resented Yi manufactured charges of treason, and he was sentenced to die. Meanwhile, the admiral who had scuttled the fleet was put back in charge and, faced with renewed Japanese reinforcements, ordered the destruction of the remaining ships and retreated. The king realized the mistake, halted Yi's execution, and apologized. He was reinstated. With only 12 refitted ships, he led another decisive victory that disrupted Japanese supply lines and stalled their advance. After Toyotomi Hideyoshi's death, the Japanese leadership ultimately called off the invasion. He insisted on pursuing the invaders. With new ships and the assistance of the Ming dynasty of China, they engaged the remaining Japanese forces. A Ming admiral made a rash frontal charge that upset Yi's plans, but he adapted and supported the Allied effort. During a later battle, Admiral E was struck and killed by a stray musket ball. Before he died, he instructed a soldier to don his armor so the men would not lose heart. The Allied forces won the engagement, and most of the Japanese fleet did not return home. Admiral E. Sun-sin is remembered as the commander who, despite betrayal and political opposition, saved his kingdom through brilliant naval strategy and unwavering leadership. Story 51. Dashrath Manji, the mountain man, carved a path through a mountain single-handedly to create a shorter route to a hospital after his wife died from a fall on the mountain because she did not receive timely medical treatment. It took him 22 years. The authorities did not act, so he did. This occurred in rural India, and a film was made about him. Story 52. For the last track of their album Innuendo, Queen was arguing about whether Freddie Mercury was healthy enough to sing. May said, "I said, Fred, I don't know if this is going to be possible to sing." Freddie replied, "I'll fucking do it, darling." He put his vodka down and recorded the entire song in one take. Story 53. Prince single-handedly wrote, produced, and played all the instruments and performed his own vocals on Purple Rain. He recorded each instrument in full, layered the tracks, and edited them together, adding his vocals as the final touch. Story 54. I have posted this man before. Total badass. Scroll down and read the Medal of Honor citation. While you read it, remember that this happened after he stepped on a landmine a few years earlier and taught himself to walk again. Story 55. Clarence B. Craft, Medal of Honor recipient in World War II. This citation reads, he was a rifleman when his platoon spearheaded an attack on Hen Hill, the tactical position on which the entire Naha Ashuri Yanabaro line of Japanese defense on Okinawa in the Ryukyu Islands was hinged. For 12 days United States forces had been stalled, and repeated heavy assaults by one battalion and then another had been thrown back by the enemy with serious casualties. With 5 comrades, Private First Class Clarence B. Craft was dispatched in advance of Company G to feel out the enemy resistance. The group had proceeded only a short distance up the slope when rifle and machine gun fire, coupled with a terrific barrage of grenades, wounded 3 and pinned down the others. Against odds that appeared suicidal, Private First Class Craft launched a remarkable one-man attack. He stood up in full view of the enemy and began shooting with deadly marksmanship wherever he saw hostile movement. He steadily advanced up the hill, killing Japanese soldiers with rapid fire, driving others to cover in their strongly disposed trenches, unhesitatingly facing alone the strength that had previously beaten back attacks in battalion strength. He reached the crest of the hill, where he stood silhouetted against the sky while quickly throwing grenades at extremely short range into the enemy positions. His extraordinary assault lifted the pressure from his company for the moment, allowing members of his platoon to comply with his motions to advance and pass him more grenades. With a chain of his comrades supplying him while he stood atop the hill, he furiously hurled a total of 2 cases of grenades into a main trench and other positions on the reverse slope of Hen Hill, meanwhile directing the aim of his fellow soldiers who threw grenades from the slope below him. He left his position, where grenades from both sides were passing over his head and bursting on either slope, to attack the main enemy trench as confusion and panic seized the defenders. Straddling the excavation, he pumped rifle fire into the Japanese at point-blank range, killing many and causing the others to flee down the trench. Pursuing them, he came upon a heavy machine gun which was still creating havoc in the United States ranks. With rifle fire and a grenade he wiped out this position. By this time the Japanese were in complete rout and United States forces were swarming over the hill. Private First Class Craft continued down the central trench to the mouth of a cave where many of the enemy had taken cover. A satchel charge was brought to him and he tossed it into the cave. Failed to explode. With great daring, the intrepid fighter retrieved the charge from the cave, relit the fuse and threw it back, sealing the enemy in a tomb. In the local action against tremendously superior forces heavily armed with rifles, machine guns, mortars, and grenades, Private First Class Craft killed at least 25 of the enemy. But his contribution to the campaign on Okinawa was of much more far-reaching consequence, for Hen Hill was the key to the entire defense line, which rapidly crumbled after his utterly fearless and heroic attack. Story 56. During the invasion of Germany, General Patton was told not to take Trier because it would require 4 divisions and would not be worth the time or manpower. He sent a message back saying, "Have taken Trier with 2 divisions. What do you want me to do? Give it back." Story 57. Probably Catherine the Great took Russia away from her incompetent husband. Story 58. Bach Tower Gardens in Florida. Edward W. Bach, a Dutch immigrant, bought Iron Mountain, one of the highest peaks in Florida, to build a spot of beauty second to none in the United States. He funded the project himself in 1921 and gave the architects and artists freedom to create one of the most beautiful places in the country. The Carillon Tower is 205 feet tall. President Calvin Coolidge dedicated the tower on February 1, 1929. It still stands today much as it did then. I visited for the first time just before the coronavirus pandemic. I was blown away and highly recommend that anyone nearby visit. Story 59. Alfred Wegener was not believed when he proposed that the continents were once joined as a single landmass called Pangaea. He conducted his own research and died in a blizzard in Greenland. About 30 years after his death, the ideas of continental drift and plate tectonics became accepted. Story 60. Lin-Manuel Miranda kept getting denied roles, so he decided to write his musical and made sure that he would get the lead. He was Us Navy in The Heights and Alexander Hamilton in Hamilton. Story 61. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand occurred after the Black Hand devised a meticulous plan to kill him while he toured the city. After a bomb was thrown and missed, and an assailant attempted suicide in a puddle, one of the conspirators ultimately shot the Archduke after he stopped for a sandwich. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.